welcome back to my channel. My name is Stacey Flowers and I am a student of Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University and on a journey to become 100% debt-free. My current debt is over $183,000. I currently work part-time, earning anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 a month. I recently opened up my company quarter time and it is becoming profitable. In this video, I'm going to be examining specifically how I was able to release the emotion of resentment over the last couple of days as I was trying to adjust my emotions to shift my behaviors with respect to continually going over budget. So if you are interested in understanding the process that I took to do the emotional work of releasing resentment, some of my reflections that have come up and the ultimate impact that that's going to have on my budget moving forward, please keep watching. So I am super as I was doing this emotional work, I will tell you guys, I didn't think that I would want to do it. To be perfectly honest, I didn't think that I was going to want to come on here and talk to you guys about the process, but it has been powerful and so incredibly helpful, and I'm so happy that I listened to my gut when it came to knowing that this was just the thing that I needed to do. And so I'm excited about doing it, but there's also a little bit of trepidation just because it was very interesting, sort of the things that came up. So what I want to do sort of to break down the video so you will know is first I'm going to talk about the process, and then I'm going to talk about specifically what came up for me in each of the steps, and then I'm going to talk about the reflections and what things are going to be moving forward. I will leave timestamps down below. I encourage you to watch the entire video though, because I think it'll be insightful and helpful for you all who are out there wanting to do emotional work. My disclaimer is this: I highly recommend doing emotional work with someone else, whether that be a therapist or a life coach, someone who really has the emotional capacity to be able to hold space for what comes up. In my work, I do a lot of work as a life coach, but I'm also in therapy right now. So both just in the years that I've committed to reading and studying and practicing as a life coach, but then also because I know that I have support should anything massive come up. I felt very comfortable to just dive right into this emotional work. If you are someone who's been watching my videos and you're inspired to do your own emotional work, I just highly encourage you to be patient with yourself. And if you are finding yourself stuck or blocked, or it's like, this isn't working for me, you may just need to bring in some support to be able to help you through that. And a really good place to find support is through a life coach or a therapist. I don't necessarily encourage that you do the emotional work with a friend. And again, it's because our friends' perspectives, our friends, our spouses, the people who we already have bonds with, they experience us from the point in which they met us. And even the best kind of friend, unless they're trained in this work, it's hard for them not to confuse what you're expressing and what's coming up with what they know about you. And so when they're parroting back or they're just holding space for you, there's some comfort that they'll be offering to you in that space that doesn't really aid you in really expressing all of the things that need to be expressed, especially when it gets tough. So that's just sort of my disclaimer, is that I've studied this, I've practiced this for quite some time. I love this kind of work. This is basically what I do with my clients on the personal growth and development side of my company. So just be mindful that emotional work is challenging, and it's helpful to have someone support you when you are processing things. So I knew that from the budget and me just reflecting that the emotions that I needed to release were resentment, guilt, and shame. I didn't necessarily pick which one to start with. The first, sort of when I was just jotting down my thoughts, resentment was the first one that came up, and maybe because I had the strongest financial reaction to it, maybe that's why it came up, I'm not for sure, but resentment came up first, and so that was the first one that I started to deal with. And if you remember from my budget video, I talk about how resentment is a feeling of the indignation of having been treated unfairly. An indignation is the perception that you've been treated unfairly. And so there are a couple of categories in my budget specifically around personal hygiene, getting things for my home, buying and doing things, I think primarily for myself, like pocket money, where I had a ton of resentment. And so I really wanted to figure that out, because those are the areas where I'm constantly breaking my budget, and I'm like, okay, I need to figure this emotion out. And if you're just now watching this video, my philosophy is that our thoughts create our emotions create our behavior informs our habits, and our habits inform our life. So a lot of times, clients will come to me, or people will come to me, and they don't like the results in their life, and so they want to change the results. They want to change the people that they have around them, the place where they're living, etc. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but like your thoughts, habits, and behaviors and your thoughts, emotions, behavior, and habits are sort of what created that. So you can get rid of that, but chances are you're going to recreate that again. So typically when I'm working with people, I'm working with them more so at the emotional level. Sometimes I work with thoughts, but primarily at the emotional at the emotional and habitual level. And so that's just an aside for those of you who didn't watch the other video, which I highly recommend that you watch it, because this video will make a lot more sense. So the steps that I took to do the emotional work, my first step, my number one thing that I do is I do a quick prayer. And I do prayer because for me, going inside, you never know what's going to be in there. And I like to connect to my creator. I like to connect to God, to just stay grounded and centered through the process. Emotions are like, can be all over the place, and you just never know what's going to come up. And so for me, I love to start an emotional process with prayer. And it's just a really quick prayer, I pray for the strength to be able to get through all of the truths that are going to come up, and that's it. It's not like a long drawn out thing. Then the second thing that I do is I journal 3 pieces of gratitude. And it's important for me to actually journal it and express it, because it's one thing for you to think, oh, I'm so happy and grateful for my apartment, I'm so happy and grateful for whatever. It's another thing for you to say it, but it's an even deeper, richer thing for you to actually write it down. And the gratitude part is to position me so that way, no matter what emotions come up, like I don't lose my perspective. Like I don't lose perspective that like all is well and you have these amazing, great things in your life right now. Then after I journal 3 pieces of gratitude, I take a deep breath and I ask myself the very hard question, which is, why do you need blankety blank emotion? Like, why do you need that? And I start the emotional workout with the assumption that I need this emotion, or that I need this thing that I have in my life. And that really comes from Louise L. Hay's work. She, in her book, You Can Heal Your Life, she has this phenomenal concept of like, when people do things that are not beneficial to themselves, like, right, when people have habits that don't really, like, let's, for example, like smoking. And universally, it has been understood that smoking is bad for you because of the things that it causes in terms of physical damage and its ability to be able to produce cancer, blah, 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 like whatever, smoking, right? And so in her book, she talks about how like a person who smokes, who doesn't want to smoke, one of the main reasons they can't get to the point of not smoking is because somehow smoking serves them. It may not serve them in the sense that like it's helping them to be healthy, etc., but that may not be the reason why they need to smoke. Maybe they're smoking because every time they smoke, they get to have a moment by themselves, and they always feel crowded, and so smoking allows them to go by themselves. Or a lot of people say that they smoke socially, so maybe they smoke so that they can be a part of the in crowd. So the first emotional work question is, okay, I ask myself, Stacey, why do you need resentment? Like, how is resentment serving you? So I move through that question, and then I journal my expressions that come after it. And so what will happen is like, why do I need resentment? I'll give my answer, and then I'll say, well, why do you need that? And then I'll give my answer, and it's just a continual why until I get to a place of emotional release. And so initially, when you may ask yourself, okay, well, why do I need to smoke? You might say, because I like it. But there's no emotional release, right? That may just be the sarcasm and the I want to do what I want to do that comes up. Then you say, okay, well, why do you like it? And then you say, I like it because, I like the taste of the menthol in my mouth. I don't know. I don't smoke. I'm just making this up as an example. And then you say, okay, well, why do you like the taste of the menthol in your mouth? And then you'll say, just something will come up, maybe like, oh, I remember when I was little and, I was playing with my cousins and we got in trouble and I had to have a mint and excuse me, we stole mints from the store and it was exhilarating or something like that. And so the menthol flavor from the cigarette reminds you of the time that you stole, which was an exhilarating moment. And so then you're like, okay, why does an exhilarating moment or why does stealing feel exhilarating? So then you're like, oh, well, stealing feels exhilarating because, you know, in my life, I always have to be a good girl. And this is the first time I did something bad. And it was so like amazing to get away with it. And so probably by the time that you hit that, you'll have like an epiphany and you'll be like, oh my God, like you know, feel like I have to be a good girl and I don't want to be a good girl. And sometimes the emotional release is tears. My emotional release for resentment was many tears. Sometimes the emotional relief is just an aha. Sometimes you'll get instantly fatigued and you'll just like come to an answer and then you're like, you know what? I need a nap. I'm done. I'm over this. But the emotional release is some sort of reaction that expresses the weight of what you've been carrying. And so like, for example, people oftentimes when they're doing emotional work, they'll like yawn and stuff like that. And it's because you're tired, because even though you're sitting here answering 4 or 5 questions, emotionally, you are feeling all of the feels. And so that breaks you down. So the yawn is releasing some of the energy of those feelings. So after you've had your emotional release, as much as you can do on your own, move into a place of like acknowledgement for the truth that came up and why you're doing it, and acceptance that this just is something that you're doing. And if it's really intense, like for example, releasing resentment was really intense for me. So that's something that I had to work out in therapy. Like I had to go to my therapist and be like, okay, this is painful because I didn't know that this was here and I need some support here. So I actually went and worked that out in therapy. And I know that I suggest that a lot. And many of you all don't have a therapist. I have already done a video where there's like a 7-step checklist on how to find a therapist. But recently I was fortunate enough to be able to partner with a online text messaging therapy company for people who are busy or on the go, or are not ready to actually physically go into a location to speak to a therapist. You can actually connect with a therapist right through text message. And when I was building this relationship with this company, I was really intrigued because so many of you all reach out to me via email to just sort of help you through things. And I have a limit to my capacity because I'm not licensed. You know, I'm telling you about my process, and I know that that's serving you, but there's a limit to my capacity, just professionally, truly, because I'm not licensed, but also like emotionally and physically and psychically as well, just for health for myself and health for you. And so I'm super excited to offer you guys an opportunity to be able to sign up for therapy. If you click the link that's in the description box, it's called BetterHelp, and it takes about 10 minutes to get registered. And within half an hour of getting registered, like a therapist reaches out to you via text message, which I just thought was like super amazing. And so I'm recommending this as a resource. I'm not recommending this as something that I have used. You guys know that I have a therapist here in Chicago and I adore her. But it is, when I went through the interface and I interacted briefly with my therapist, it was something that I found to be very valuable. And it's something that I'm actually having a couple of people, not having, but I've shared with a couple of people in my family, and they are actually getting signed up for it. So I'm super excited about that. So again, I'm telling you that like your next step is to acknowledge and accept. But if you're finding that it's incredibly difficult and you need support, and you need the support in terms of therapy, that BetterHelp is an option for you, as well as getting a traditional therapist, which if you need support in knowing how to do that, again, I have a checklist in this other video that will walk you right through that process. After you've acknowledged it and you've sort of accepted it, the next step really is to process it. And you have options, right? Like you can process it alone, you can process it with a therapist, but something that I did is I did something called emotional freedom technique, or tapping. I'm gonna put the links in the description box to that as well. And what I love about tapping is tapping provides you quick, immediate relief. Once you've identified and acknowledged and gone through all the other stuff, it provides, in my opinion, it provides you immediate relief of like the painful experience that you're having. And the root of tapping is basically you actually tap on different meridian points in your body. So it's kind of like acupuncture in that like through acupuncture, you're releasing different pressure points, and in you releasing different pressure points, you're releasing potentially toxins or blocks, and emotional blocks, physical blocks, etc. And so tapping allows you to stimulate a part of your fight or flight response, which typically when we're dealing with emotions, there's a fight or flight response that's activated. It stimulates that in such a way where you are able to stimulate it so that you can move through the processing of the rest of the emotions that ultimately have been blocked. And you know that they've been blocked because they're driving behavior that you don't want. And so for me, as I was finishing the process of like acknowledgement and acceptance, talked to my therapist a little bit, then like I came back and I was like, all right, I'm going to do some tapping on this to truly get it out of my limbs, like truly release this experience. And what I find is that tapping has another like flood of an emotional release. And so again, there'll be more links to tapping below. So that is my process. That is what I did for each and every single one of these emotions, and I feel amazing going into the rest of June and moving forward in my budget. So now I want to just briefly talk about some of the things that came up. The first thing that came up was, so then I said, you know, why do you need resentment? And the sort of the first response that came up is, I need resentment because otherwise I won't be able to have anything for myself. And I was like, okay, like you feel like the only way for you to have something for yourself is resentment. And so then my response was, you know, I feel like I won't be able to have anything for myself unless unless I take it. I think it's, well, let me just read it. I don't want to read this whole thing because I actually don't want to be emotional on camera. So I'm trying to paraphrase because this was a very difficult thing to process. So I'm going to paraphrase. So yeah, I said something along the lines of, and the paraphrasing is because I just don't want to trigger myself again. But I said something along the lines of, well, if I'm not, that's not going to work. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, so the first question is, Stacey, why do you need resentment? And my response was, I didn't want to do this. Okay, why do you need resentment? And so my initial response was because if I'm not resentful, I won't have anything for myself. And so then after I had that thought, I was getting ready to ask myself the next question, which is, you know, why do you think you won't have anything for yourself? But before sort of that question was even thought, then I wrote down, I was like, that's the reason why I feel relieved when I don't save. And so immediately resentment and relief were connected. And if you look at my budget, that means that my savings and my busting my budget thing are connected. Obviously this is connected. It's not groundbreaking, but I'm explaining here how they are connected. And so so then I said, okay, well, why is, you know, relief and resentment connected? And so then my next statement was, because savings is an identity issue for me. And so then I'm like, savings is an identity issue. And the reason I pray, the reason I do gratitude, the reason I do all that is to position my heart and mind to be open to whatever comes up. Because if you censor yourself, if you edit yourself, if you are afraid of who's going to see it, you're not going to get the truth. And there's the worst lie you will ever tell is a lie that you tell to yourself. And you know, I'm not about that life, and or at least I'm trying not to be about that life. And so these are very raw answers that came up. And so I was like, I wrote, you know, it's an identity issue for me. And so then the question was, well, why is it an identity issue? Because again, you just keep asking why. And so then I write out the story of, like, you know, having my piggy bank, and, you know, I had a piggy bank, and then, you know, I used the piggy bank for the family. And then after that, what came up was, it wasn't just that I had to use the piggy bank for the family. It was that I didn't have a piggy bank with my family. I had a piggy bank with my foster family. I had a piggy bank with my foster family. And so with my foster family, I learned how to save, because that was just something that they offered to me while I was in foster care. And so my savings actually happened in foster care. It didn't happen with my family. And so when I did go back to my family and there was a need for my piggy bank, you know, I gave my piggy bank. And so I'm going to paraphrase this part because I don't want to read it. So what I concluded was that it was an identity issue because what I want is to belong to my family. But what savings feels like so when she died, that was very traumatic. And after her death, there were like a series of unfortunate events, and it was very chaotic and very dark and very awful. And when it wasn't awful, I was no longer in my family home. I was in a different home. And so I believe, for me, a sort of split happened, because anytime there's trauma, like all the good and the bad and everything that happens around trauma, like you give it meaning, or I give it meaning, people give it meaning, but specifically as a child, like I gave it meaning. And so the meaning that I gave to money specifically, and this is other stuff that I gave meaning to very early on, was that savings is what I did with my foster family, and spending is what I did with my real family. So, as you guys are seeing this emotional reaction, the reason I'm not editing it out is because I want you to understand that when I am suggesting therapy, I'm not suggesting therapy because it's trending and everybody's all self-care, self-love. I'm suggesting it because when you want something out of life and you've done the work, right? Like you've gotten the education, you've put in you paid your dues, you've checked off all the boxes, and your life isn't ending up the way that you want it to end up. The common denominator in that is you. And it's not that there's something wrong. It's simply that there is something that is still hurting, that when you get to a certain point, you will sabotage yourself unconsciously because you didn't know that this thing over here hurt. And so for me, with resentment, like I had resentment and savings, like I had no idea how much I had connected savings with belonging to somebody different than my family. And obviously I want to belong to my family because I love them, but more so than that, what came up was, I want my sister, and she's not here, and she's never gonna be here. And that seems super dramatic, and that's why I said this is something that I had to do with therapy, because clearly there's trauma there, because this money stuff, it doesn't really, there's no, where was the bridge that connected that? The bridge that connected it was trauma. And so inside of that trauma, as I'm trying to reach for new heights, I have this unconscious thing in my mind that says, Stacey, don't be like your foster family. Even if what they did was good for you, don't be like them, because if you stay like them, you're going to lose your sister and your family. And foster care was particularly traumatic for me because, my sister died, and my mom and my dad had a really hard time with it. And so we went to foster care, and there was 4 of us. I have 2 older sisters and a younger sister, but they could not find a place for all 4 of us to go. So they separated us. And so my older 2 sisters went somewhere, and then me and my younger sister went somewhere. So within a very short period of time, it felt like I lost my sister who actually died. It felt like I lost my mom. It felt like I lost my dad. And it felt like I lost my 2 older sisters. And I think that, like, that's difficult, right? Because to feel like you've experienced that much loss is overwhelming in general. And the truth of the matter is I did lose all of them for a period of time. But as a kid, I didn't understand death. So when I did get my family back, I didn't get my sister who died back. So it's like, there's not a understanding of death. There's just this, you have a new family, and these people are not your family. So it feels like internally and emotionally, it feels like a choice between being like my foster family and being like my real family. And this is no judgment about their behavior. It's just, where did you learn to put money away? Where did you learn to spend money? Then the memory of actually using my piggy bank to do something for my family and like deriving significance from that, etc. So as I'm processing resentment, that comes up. And, you know, it's very difficult because I have to release, because resentment is serving me. Because so long as so what is the definition of resentment? Is having thought that you've been treated unfairly. And so the thing that I feel like is incredibly unfair is that the thing that I feel like that is incredibly unfair is that my sister died and my whole family fell apart, or I lost my family for a short period of time. And I think as an adult, it feels unfair that in the losing of them and in me having a foster family, that like I had to choose, because I don't want to do that. And I understand as an adult, like, it's irrational to feel that way. And that's why I say, listen, therapy. It's irrational to feel that way, but, you know, I shouldn't have to choose between 2 families, right? Like, but in this space of trying to manage my finances, this is what I'm facing. And some of you may be watching this and you just may be like, you know, this is doing the most. And I understand that perspective. But let me offer you this. In America, the top 1 to 3 reasons for divorce is money. People are not divorcing people that they once loved and stood in front of hundreds of people to declare their love for. They're not divorcing them for money because they've lost money or because they've gained money. They're divorcing them because of money, because money is emotional. And when you're married to someone, say for example, and they make a decision and it directly impacts a wound that you don't consciously know that you have, and you suddenly feel the need to escape from this person, you will say, you know what, I know we have a house and 3 children and a career and a life, but this money issue is too much for me to bear. And so I'm going to walk away from us doing life together. I'm going to walk away from my commitment and my vows because this money thing is so painful. So you may be looking at my scenario and me being this single person and expressing this and saying this is doing the most, but I encourage you to look at your own personal behavior, but you can just look at the statistics of why people do things and how people are motivated and what people will do for money. That is not something that they just came up with in their adult life. It's like, no, for the most part, we all have a financial blueprint, and some of our financial blueprints are informed by healthy, amazing, spectacular experiences, and some of them are not. And then when you have those 2 people try to come together, or you even have that one person try to do something for themselves, it becomes difficult because it's not money, it's neutral. It's not about the money. It's about the meaning that you've given to the money, and the meaning that I have given to money, specifically as it relates to savings and spending, is that savings is not my real family and spending is. And that's difficult, and that's not my parents' fault. That was the circumstances. And so I feel resentful because it's unfair that my sister died. It's unfair that I have to reconcile these worlds. It's unfair that when I do for myself, I feel terrible. It's unfair. And so, at least this is what I'm telling myself, right? And so, so that came up. It's just that the other thing that came up is it's not just that I want to show loyalty to my family. What I realized in doing a little bit more work is that I also wanted to show loyalty to my sister, because things didn't change until she died. And there's this childlike hope that so that brings me back to releasing the resentment. And it brings me back to why I have to be resentful to take care of myself, right? Like every month I go over budget and personal hygiene and little knickknacks and who's-its and things that would make a home. There's some areas where it's just like, anything that's connected and tied back to this, there's this anger and feeling of having been treated unfairly, and that was the root of the thing that I felt like was very unfair. And up and until now, I felt like I needed resentment in order to take care of myself, because I felt so bad for being mad at my sister for dying. I also felt bad for blaming her for ruining our family, which again, very unconscious. I'm not consciously sitting around doing this, but you can see from my emotional reaction that that's really what was underneath. And that being underneath, driving my thoughts, my behaviors, and my patterns, it's like I use resentment so that I can make the excuse to go over budget. I can make the excuse not to save. And I do that so that I can maintain a level of distraction from this pain. I want to be distracted. I want to fail, because if I save, if I do this, then that means I'm like my foster family. And that means I was in foster care. And that means my sister died. And that means my family was ruined. But those are hard truths to face and a hard pain to sit in, even all these years later. And so it's easier to distract myself with going over budget. It's easier to distract myself with not saving. It's easier than facing that truth. But as many of you know, I learned and I heal very well through talking out loud. And so I have expressed this to myself through journaling. I've expressed this with my therapist, and I'm now expressing it again. But you can see that like it's still progressing. It's not like I'm going to do it once and it's going to be fine. It's like, no, this truth was like freaking difficult, it's hard to even say it, right? Like, let alone do it. And so I'm here now, and I'm gonna move forward with every day working to release some of the resentment, and some of the release of my resentment is going to be through me continuing to do grief work, which is something that I do in therapy. So then after I came from some therapy with grief work and just working around the traumas with that, I went in, I finished this releasing off with some emotional freedom technique, and I just tapped on it, and I just said, even though I feel resentment and anger about having to choose between my foster family and my real family, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Like, even though I think that savings and spending is a choice between two families, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And I just kept going through it until I got to the point where I was just like, even though I once thought that savings and spending was a choice between my real family and my foster family, I now know, you know, and I just keep the emotional freedom technique going until I feel the release in my body. And I've done emotional freedom technique enough to know that my emotions also express themselves physically. And so it was my limbs, like my arms and my legs. And so I basically tapped until I wasn't crying anymore. And also when my limbs felt released. And so moving forward throughout this month, when I get to the point of putting money in my savings, I'm going to tap through that. I'm going to journal through that. I'm going to do all that to support myself and actually putting money to the side. And so as I close out this first video, again, I just want to encourage you all, if you're interested in doing the emotional work around money and figuring out why you can't save, or why you overspend, why you're in debt, why you're not financially where you are capable of being, I encourage you to, you know, go through some emotional work like this. And this is my perspective on people, is that people are inherently good. Like, everybody is good to me, like every single person. And I believe that when people do bad things, not necessarily to other people, but when people do bad things to themselves or for themselves, that there is a reason for that. And the reason for that, there's this why, there's a why for that. And I believe searching for the why enables you to be able to do something about it. A lot of people think searching for the why just gives you the excuse to be able to continue the behavior. But it's like, if someone is harming themselves and not being kind to themselves and not supporting themselves, it's like, no, if you figure out why that person is doing it, you can give them the information that will allow them to be able to figure out what tools they need to support themselves so that they stop harming themselves, so that they stop blocking themselves. And so for me, this emotional work was about uncovering my why. I needed to know why this was happening. So now I know where to go look for tools, right? One of my tools is therapy, and to do some grief work, because this grieving thing that I need to do is impeding things. Like, and it's helping to make so much of my other successes and when I say that releasing this resentment at this level has been crazy helpful, it's been crazy helpful. So again, I encourage you to do the emotional work to find the why, not because the why excuses the behavior, but because the why gives you the information so you know which tools you will need so you can pluck out these piss poor habits and behavior, especially as it relates to money. This could be related to anything, but especially as it relates to money, because I know I'm way too intelligent for a lot of my money behaviors, right? Like, I know way too much for my money behaviors, and I'm willing to do the work and willing to face myself and say, hey, gotta be something else going on here. Let's figure out why. And when we have that, let me go and do the other work that is involved in that. So I hope that this video was incredibly helpful for you all. It has been amazing for me to do this work. So I appreciate you all for supporting my work, and I look forward to chatting with you in the next video.